Have you ever wondered why suddenly so many global companies are setting up factories in India? Why every few weeks we hear about a new manufacturing plant, a new automobile facility, a new electronics hub, a new industrial corridor, a new logistics park? At first glance, these announcements look completely unrelated. Different companies, different industries, different states, different products. But if you zoom out, something fascinating begins to appear. It starts looking less like random news and more like pieces of a giant puzzle slowly fitting together. For decades, India was largely known as a country that consumed products designed and manufactured elsewhere. We assembled, distributed, and sold them. Manufacturing existed, of course, but it was rarely the center of the national growth story. Today, that equation is quietly changing. Across the country, policymakers are focusing on creating conditions that make manufacturing more competitive. Roads are improving. Freight movement is becoming faster. Ports are expanding. Rail connectivity is improving. Industrial clusters are becoming more organized. Regulations are gradually becoming easier to navigate. Domestic production is increasingly being encouraged, while companies investing in advanced manufacturing are finding stronger policy support. These changes may not grab headlines every day, but they slowly change the economics of doing business. Think of it like preparing farmland before sowing seeds. When you look at an empty field, it appears that nothing is happening. But underneath the surface, the soil is being prepared. Water channels are being built. The land is being leveled. Nutrients are being added. Months later, people admire the harvest. Very few remember the preparation. Economies work in exactly the same way. The biggest wealth is often created not when the crop is harvested, but when the land is quietly becoming fertile. Now think about something else. Whenever a new automobile factory is announced, most investors immediately ask, which car company will benefit? It's a natural question, but it may not be the most profitable one. Imagine you decide to open a restaurant. Everyone notices the restaurant. Few people notice the companies supplying the kitchen equipment, the refrigeration systems, the furniture, the water purification units, or the software managing orders. Yet every new restaurant needs all of them. Now multiply that idea across an entire country. When manufacturing expands, when automobile production increases, when exports rise, when infrastructure improves, it isn't just the companies with famous brands that benefit. A whole ecosystem begins to grow. Steel producers, precision engineering firms, industrial automation companies, component manufacturers, specialty chemical suppliers, logistics providers, testing laboratories. Every one of them becomes part of a much larger machine. And here's something fascinating about markets. Investors often fall in love with the final product. But institutional investors spend far more time studying the companies hidden behind the final product. Why? Because that's where compounding often begins. There is an old investing principle that says, asterisk, asterisk, don't just follow the parade. Look for the people selling shoes to everyone marching in it. Asterisk, asterisk. That idea changes how you look at businesses. Instead of asking, which car will sell the most? You begin asking, who supplies almost every major car manufacturer? Instead of asking, which electric vehicle will win? You ask, who benefits no matter which manufacturer wins? This is called second-order thinking. Most people stop at the obvious answer. The better investors ask what happens next, and then what happens after that. Because in investing, first-order thinking often discovers good companies. Second-order thinking discovers exceptional investments. Now add another layer. Today's automobile is no longer just an engine with 4 wheels. It is becoming a computer on wheels. Customers expect better safety, better comfort, lower emissions, improved fuel efficiency, connected features, electric drivetrains, advanced suspension, better ride quality. Every improvement creates demand for better engineering. Not just more engineering, better engineering. And companies capable of solving these increasingly complex problems often become far more valuable than those merely producing larger quantities. This is where today's story begins. Not with a famous automobile manufacturer, not with a luxury brand, not with an electric vehicle startup, but with a company working quietly behind the scenes. A company whose products most people never notice, yet almost every vehicle owner experiences every single day. A company that doesn't sell dreams directly to consumers. It sells confidence to the companies building those dreams. Today, we're going to understand not just what this company manufactures, but a far more important question. Has the market already priced in its future? Or is the real story only beginning? Because a great business and a great investment are not always the same thing. And understanding the difference is where intelligent investing truly begins. The company you never notice until you realize almost every vehicle needs it. Now let me ask you a simple question. When you buy a car, what is the first thing you notice? The design? The engine? The touchscreen? The mileage? Maybe the brand. Very few people say, I bought this car because it has excellent shock absorbers. Yet imagine driving on one of India's highways. A smooth expressway suddenly turns into an uneven village road. A speed breaker appears without warning. A pothole hides under rainwater. A sharp corner arrives faster than expected. In those few seconds, something works silently beneath the vehicle. You don't see it. You don't think about it. But it decides whether your journey feels comfortable or exhausting, whether the tires remain planted on the road or momentarily lose grip, whether your vehicle remains stable during braking or becomes difficult to control. That invisible hero is the suspension system. And this is where today's company enters the story. Gabriel India is not trying to become the next automobile brand. It doesn't compete with companies that sell cars or motorcycles. Instead, it follows a completely different philosophy. It builds the critical engineering systems that allow those vehicles to perform the way customers expect. Think of a Bollywood movie. Everyone remembers the actor. Few people remember the cinematographer. Yet without great cinematography, the hero never looks like a hero. Gabriel plays a similar role inside the automobile industry. The vehicle manufacturer receives the applause. The component manufacturer quietly enables that applause. And surprisingly, this quiet role often creates a very powerful business model because the company is not dependent on a single automobile manufacturer. Instead of betting on one winner, it supplies many of them. Imagine opening a school. Now imagine another business that supplies benches, whiteboards, fans, and projectors to hundreds of schools. Which business has broader opportunity? Exactly. The supplier grows as long as education grows. Not because one particular school succeeds. Gabriel follows a similar logic. As long as vehicle production expands, its opportunity expands alongside it. This is a mental model investors call selling picks and shovels. During a gold rush, thousands searched for gold. Some became rich. Most didn't. But the people selling picks, shovels, and tools earned money regardless of who actually discovered gold. The principle is simple. Rather than predicting the winner, build a business that benefits from many winners. That doesn't make a company risk-free, but it often makes the business model more resilient. Now here's something even more interesting. Many people think Gabriel simply manufactures shock absorbers. That would be like saying a smartphone company only makes phone covers. The reality is much deeper. Modern vehicles are changing rapidly. Customers expect smoother rides, better safety, lower noise, greater comfort, higher efficiency. Electric vehicles bring new engineering challenges. Premium vehicles demand more sophisticated suspension. Commercial vehicles require durability. Railway applications require precision. Each new requirement increases engineering complexity. And complexity, when executed well, often creates pricing power. Here's another mental model worth remembering. The value ladder. Imagine two carpenters. One only sells wooden planks. The other designs custom furniture. Both use the same wood. But one gets paid for material. The other gets paid for expertise. Companies climb the same ladder. The more engineering, design, and intellectual property they provide, the more valuable they become. This is exactly why management is no longer satisfied with being known only for traditional suspension products. Instead of remaining inside one corner of the automobile ecosystem, they are gradually expanding into adjacent technologies: thermal management, automotive fasteners, advanced mobility solutions, sunroof systems through partnerships, new technologies connected with future vehicles. Notice something important here. Management is not abandoning its core business. It is building around it. That is a very different strategy. Imagine a successful restaurant. It doesn't suddenly start manufacturing televisions. Instead, it adds desserts, then catering, then packaged food. Every expansion stays close to what it already understands. Investors call this adjacency expansion. Growth becomes less risky because management is moving into neighboring opportunities rather than unfamiliar territory. History shows that many successful compounders followed this path. They didn't become giants overnight. They expanded one circle at a time. And every new circle strengthened the previous one. Now let's connect this to something investors often overlook. A business can grow in two completely different ways. The first way is obvious. Sell more vehicles. If automobile production increases, component demand also rises. But the second way is far more powerful. Sell more value inside every vehicle. Suppose yesterday, you supplied products worth 1,000 rupees for every car. Tomorrow you supply products worth 1,500 rupees. Even if the number of cars sold remains unchanged, your business still grows. This is called increasing content per vehicle. Institutional investors love businesses capable of doing this because they're not completely dependent on industry volume. They create their own growth. And if you look carefully at management's recent actions, this appears to be the direction they're trying to follow. Not merely producing more, but becoming more important inside every automobile. Now ask yourself another question. If management is investing in new factories, acquiring strategic assets, forming partnerships with global technology companies, and entering adjacent businesses, what are they really saying? They're making a statement without speaking. Businesses communicate in two ways: through words and through capital allocation. Words are easy. Capital is expensive. Whenever management invests hundreds of crores into new capabilities, new products, and future technologies, they are effectively saying, "We believe tomorrow's opportunity is larger than today's." Of course, every investment does not automatically succeed. Factories don't generate returns simply because they are built. New products don't guarantee customer acceptance. Partnerships don't always create profitable businesses. Execution decides everything. And this brings us to perhaps the most fascinating part of investing. A company can be excellent. Its management can be capable. Its industry can have enormous opportunity. And yet, the stock may still fail to deliver exceptional returns. Why? Because investing is never just about finding a great business. It is about understanding what expectations are already reflected in the stock price. And that is where our story now takes a much deeper turn. The next chapter isn't about factories, or products, or even management. It's about the single question that separates an excellent company from an excellent investment. Does Gabriel India's current valuation leave enough room for future wealth creation, or has the market already paid in advance for tomorrow's success? Because in investing, the price you pay is often just as important as the business you buy. A great business. But is it also a great investment? Now comes the question that separates an investor from a business admirer. Suppose I tell you Gabriel India is a wonderful company. Strong management, growing profits, healthy cash flows, very little debt, expanding into new technologies. Most people immediately ask, so, should I buy the stock? But that's actually the wrong question. Because investing has never been about buying great companies. It has always been about buying great companies at the right expectations. Notice I didn't say, at the right price. I said, at the right expectations. Because the stock market doesn't reward yesterday's success. It rewards companies that outperform what investors already expect. Think about cricket. Imagine Virat Kohli scores a century. Nobody is surprised. People clap. Because they expected it. Now imagine a young debutant scores a century. The reaction is completely different. Not because the runs are different, but because expectations were different. The stock market works exactly the same way. When expectations become extremely high, even excellent performance sometimes isn't enough. And that brings us to the biggest debate surrounding Gabriel India today. Not whether the business is improving. That part is relatively clear. The real debate is, has the market already celebrated tomorrow's success before tomorrow actually arrives? This is where valuation enters the story. And valuation is probably the most misunderstood concept in investing. Many people think valuation answers only one question. Is the stock expensive or cheap? Institutional investors ask a completely different question. Expensive compared to what? Compared to today's earnings? Compared to tomorrow's earnings? Compared to competitors? Compared to the quality of management? Compared to future cash generation? Compared to replacement cost? Or compared to the opportunity still left in the business? Different valuation models answer different questions. Let's understand them one by one. Imagine two grocery shops. Both earn 1 lakh rupees every month. The first shop is available for 20 lakh rupees. The second costs 80 lakh rupees. Without knowing anything else. Which one looks expensive? Most of us will point to the second shop. That instinct forms the basis of the price-to-earnings ratio, or PE. It tells us how much investors are willing to pay today for 1 rupee of current earnings. At first glance, Gabriel India appears expensive on this measure. Its valuation stands well above many companies in the broader auto component industry. For a value investor, that immediately raises a red flag. But now imagine something changes. The first grocery shop is located in a small town with little room to expand. The second is opening new stores every year, attracting more customers, introducing new products, and steadily increasing profits. Suddenly, the higher price doesn't look irrational. You're no longer paying for today's earnings. You're paying for tomorrow's possibilities. This is the first lesson in valuation. A premium valuation is not proof of overvaluation. It is proof that the market expects something extraordinary. The next question is, are those expectations realistic? To answer that, investors move beyond PE and look at something called the PEG ratio. Think of two mango orchards. The first orchard is cheap, but every year it produces exactly the same number of mangoes. The second orchard costs much more, yet every year it produces significantly more fruit than the year before because new trees are maturing. Which orchard is actually cheaper? The answer depends on growth. That's exactly what PEG measures. It asks, after adjusting for future growth, is the price still reasonable? In Gabriel India's case, the market is assigning a valuation that already reflects meaningful future growth. This tells us something very important. The market is not merely buying today's business. It is buying management's ability to execute tomorrow's business. And that changes the entire investment equation. Now let's look at another idea. Imagine two farmers. Each invests 100 rupees. One consistently harvests 25 rupees every season. The other harvests only 10. If you had to partner with one farmer for the next 10 years, whom would you choose? Most people naturally choose the first. That instinct explains return on capital employed, or ROEs. It measures how efficiently management converts investment into profits. This is one of Gabriel India's biggest strengths. For several years, The company has demonstrated that it can generate attractive returns from the capital entrusted to it. And this is precisely why quality investors continue to follow the business closely. Because businesses that consistently earn high returns on capital often poses something deeper. Efficient operations, strong customer relationships, pricing discipline, engineering capability, or all of them together. But here's another question. Suppose someone proudly tells you, I earn 2 lakh rupees every month. Yet every week he borrows money from friends to pay his bills. Would you believe his financial strength? Probably not. Because income is one thing. Cash is another. The same applies to businesses. Profits are calculated. Cash is collected. And cash cannot be manipulated for long. Gabriel's operating cash flow has strengthened alongside its earnings. That tells us the profits are increasingly being supported by real money flowing into the business. Institutional investors love this combination. Growing profits, growing cash flow, low debt, healthy returns on capital. Together they create what investors call earnings quality. But even that isn't enough. Here's a concept very few retail investors discuss. Imagine 2 restaurant owners. Both invest another crore to expand. One sees profits increase only slightly. The other doubles profits within a few years. Who made the better investment? Obviously the second. Markets don't just reward companies for investing. They reward companies for investing wisely. This is called return on incremental capital. It measures whether every new factory, every acquisition, every expansion, and every partnership creates more value than the previous one. And this is perhaps the single biggest question Gabriel India's management must answer over the next 5 years. Because the company is entering new businesses, building new capabilities, creating partnerships, acquiring assets. All of these decisions consume capital. If every rupee invested begins producing significantly higher earnings, today's premium valuation may eventually look completely justified. But if these investments fail to generate proportional returns, the market will eventually ask a difficult question. Were expectations too optimistic? Now think like someone buying an entire business. Not one share. The entire company. You would ask, how much money will this business generate over the next 20 years? Not next quarter. Not next year. The next 20 years. This is the philosophy behind discounted cash flow, or DCF. It reminds us that businesses are valued not for what they earned yesterday, but for the cash they are expected to generate in the future. When we compare Gabriel India's current market valuation with conservative estimates of intrinsic value, we notice a meaningful gap. That doesn't automatically mean the stock is overpriced. It simply tells us the market believes future cash flows will be much stronger than conservative assumptions suggest. In other words, investors are placing a vote of confidence on management's execution. And that brings us to another important distinction. A wonderful company does not automatically create wonderful investment returns. Imagine buying the best house in the city, but paying 3 times its fair value. The house may still be beautiful. Your investment, however, may disappoint. Benjamin Graham described this beautifully through the idea of the margin of safety. Think of carrying an umbrella. You carry it before the rain begins, not after the storm is already overhead. A lower valuation provides that umbrella. A premium valuation reduces it. Notice what this means. Gabriel India is not facing a business quality question. It is facing an expectation question. And these are completely different conversations. The business appears stronger than it was a few years ago. Management appears more ambitious. The product portfolio is expanding. The balance sheet remains healthy. Cash generation has improved. But the market has also noticed all of this. And that means the company's future must now continue exceeding already optimistic expectations. This brings us to one of the most fascinating relationships in investing. Sometimes people ask, if valuation looks expensive, why does the stock continue attracting buyers? Because charts do not measure valuation. Charts measure belief. Every transaction represents someone willing to pay more than someone else was willing to accept. When business quality improves, earnings improve, cash flows improve, management expands intelligently, and institutions quietly increase participation. Price often begins reflecting that collective confidence long before the average investor understands why. In other words, technical strength without fundamentals is speculation. Fundamentals without technical acceptance are often ignored. But when improving fundamentals, credible management, healthy cash generation, expanding opportunities, and sustained market participation begin moving together, they create something far more powerful. Not just a strong business, but a business whose story is gradually being accepted by the market itself. The next question, however, is even more important. What must happen for this story to become even stronger? And what could quietly begin to break it? Because every great investment thesis has two chapters. The reasons it can succeed, and the reasons it can fail. And wise investors always study both before making a decision. The future isn't decided by today. It's decided by what happens next. If you stayed with me till this point, you've probably realized something. The biggest risk in investing is rarely buying a bad company. The bigger risk is buying a great company at a time when nothing better happens than what the market already expects. Think about a student. He consistently scores 98 out of 100. Everyone praises him. Now imagine he scores 98 again next year. Is it a bad result? Not at all. But it also isn't an improvement. Now imagine another student who moves from 70 to 85 and then to 93. Who creates more excitement? Usually the second one. Not because he is the better student today, but because his trajectory is improving. The stock market rewards trajectories, not destinations. And that brings us to one of the most important questions every long-term investor should ask. What has to happen for Gabriel India's journey to accelerate? And equally important, what could quietly slow this journey down? Because investing is less about predicting the future and more about understanding the conditions that shape it. Let's begin with acceleration. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. Walking is progress. Finding a cable car is acceleration. Businesses also have cable cars. Events that suddenly increase the speed of value creation. For Gabriel India, the first accelerator isn't simply selling more products. It's increasing its importance inside every vehicle. Earlier, we discussed the idea of content per vehicle. Let's revisit it. Suppose a company supplies components worth 1,000 rupees for every car produced today. Now imagine that through better engineering, new technologies, and additional products, it begins supplying components worth 2,000 rupees for the same car. Notice something remarkable. The company doubled its opportunity without the customer producing a single extra vehicle. This is called deepening the customer relationship. Instead of finding more customers, you become more valuable to existing ones. Institutional investors love this because it creates growth that competitors often find difficult to copy. Now think about management's recent direction. They're not merely increasing factory capacity. They're expanding into adjacent technologies, building partnerships, entering higher-value engineering solutions, broadening the product portfolio. These decisions suggest management wants to move up the engineering value chain. And when a company successfully moves higher on the value chain, it often earns better margins, creates stronger customer relationships, and develops greater pricing power. Pricing power is another fascinating concept. Imagine there are two tea stalls. Both sell excellent tea. One can increase prices slightly without losing customers. The other loses customers immediately after raising prices. Which business is stronger? The first, because customers are paying not just for tea, but for trust. Businesses with pricing power often compound wealth for years because inflation doesn't completely erode their profitability. In engineering companies, pricing power usually comes from technology, precision, quality, reliability, and years of customer confidence. These qualities cannot be built overnight. Another accelerator lies in something investors rarely discuss: operating leverage. Imagine you own a cinema hall. Whether 10 people come or 100 people come, many costs remain exactly the same: electricity, building maintenance, staff, security. Now imagine ticket sales double. Revenue increases dramatically, but costs increase only a little. Profits rise much faster than revenue. Factories often behave in exactly the same way. Once capacity starts getting utilized efficiently, profit growth can accelerate faster than sales growth. That is why investors don't merely watch revenue. They watch whether operating margins improve as scale increases. Because margin expansion tells a beautiful story. It says management isn't just growing, it is growing efficiently. Now imagine another possibility. As India's automobile ecosystem continues evolving, manufacturers increasingly seek suppliers capable of offering multiple engineering solutions under one roof. Who receives the first call? Usually not the cheapest supplier, the trusted supplier. Trust is one of the most undervalued assets in business. It takes decades to build, minutes to lose, and years to rebuild. Gabriel India's long-standing relationships with major automobile manufacturers become valuable precisely because trust reduces uncertainty. Customers don't merely buy products, they buy consistency. Now let's look at another accelerator: exports. Imagine you own the best bakery in one city. Growth eventually slows because your city has limited customers. Now imagine your products become popular across the country. Suddenly, your market becomes many times larger. The same logic applies to engineering businesses. Domestic demand creates one opportunity. Global demand creates another. The larger the addressable market, the larger the runway for growth. But remember, a larger runway alone doesn't make an aircraft fly. Execution does. And that takes us to management. Investors often think management guidance means predictions. It doesn't. Good management guidance reveals priorities. Look carefully at Gabriel India's recent actions. The company isn't promising overnight miracles. Instead, it is patiently investing in technologies that could become increasingly relevant over the coming years. That is a subtle but important difference. Promises create headlines. Execution creates shareholder wealth. This is why experienced investors spend more time watching capital allocation than conference presentations. Money reveals conviction far better than words. Now let's change the perspective completely. Suppose everything we've discussed begins happening exactly as management hopes. Revenue keeps improving. Margins gradually strengthen. Cash flows remain healthy. Returns on capital stay attractive. New businesses contribute meaningfully. The company continues increasing its value inside every vehicle. If all these pieces come together, what happens? Something very interesting. Today's premium valuation may slowly stop looking expensive. Not because the price falls, but because the business catches up. This is one of the most misunderstood ideas in investing. Sometimes valuation becomes reasonable, without the stock becoming cheaper. The business simply grows into its valuation. That is exactly how many legendary compounders looked expensive for years. Imagine management invests heavily in expansion, but demand doesn't grow as expected. Factories remain underutilized. Margins begin shrinking. Working capital keeps increasing. Cash generation slows. Returns on fresh investments decline. Partnerships fail to create meaningful business. Competition intensifies. Customers negotiate harder on pricing. Suddenly something changes. The company may still remain profitable. It may still remain fundamentally sound. But the story becomes less exciting. Remember the student who consistently scored 98? Imagine he suddenly starts scoring 90. He's still among the best students. But expectations have changed. The stock market reacts to changing expectations. Not simply absolute numbers. This phenomenon is called valuation compression. Nothing dramatic has happened. The business hasn't collapsed. But investors are no longer willing to pay yesterday's premium for tomorrow's uncertainty. That single change can reduce investment returns significantly. And this is why institutional investors continuously monitor not just quarterly profits, but the drivers behind those profits. Are margins expanding? Is cash conversion improving? Are new investments earning attractive returns? Is management delivering what it previously indicated? Is every additional rupee invested producing more value than the last one? Those questions matter far more than simply asking, did profits increase? Now let's connect everything we've discussed over the last 4 chapters. Imagine investing as building a house. The industry is the land. Management is the architect. Financial strength forms the foundation. Capital allocation builds the structure. Cash flow supplies the cement. Return on capital measures construction quality. Growth becomes the additional floors. Valuation determines the price you paid for the house. And technical behavior? Technical behavior tells you something entirely different. It tells you whether other intelligent buyers have also started recognizing the quality of that house. A strong chart doesn't prove the house is beautiful. A weak chart doesn't prove it is ugly. It simply reflects changing demand. When improving business quality and improving market confidence begin moving together, the probability of sustained wealth creation increases. That is why some companies repeatedly attract attention across multiple independent analytical frameworks. Not because everyone is copying each other, but because different roads are quietly leading to the same destination. One analyst notices improving earnings. Another notices stronger cash flow. A third notices better capital allocation. Someone else observes expanding institutional participation. Another studies improving business momentum. Individually, these signals may not mean much. Together, they begin forming a mosaic. Like several doctors independently arriving at the same diagnosis through different tests. And when independent evidence starts pointing in the same direction, confidence naturally increases. But one final question still remains unanswered. Among all the companies operating in India's automotive ecosystem, where does Gabriel India truly stand? Is it becoming the next generation engineering compounder? Or is it simply enjoying a favorable phase in the industry cycle? To answer that, we must compare not just numbers, but business character. Because the future belongs not merely to companies that grow, but to companies that keep reinventing themselves while protecting the qualities that made them successful in the first place. Is Gabriel India becoming the next long-term compounder? Let me ask you one final question. If I removed the company's name from this entire discussion and simply described a business with improving earnings, strong cash generation, high returns on capital, very little debt, and ambitious management, expanding product portfolio, and growing participation from informed investors, would you say it sounds like a company worth studying? Most people would answer, absolutely. Now comes the difficult part. A business can look attractive on paper, but investing isn't about finding good businesses. It's about finding businesses that can continue becoming better than the market already expects. And to answer that question, we shouldn't compare Gabriel India with weak companies. We should compare it with companies that have already traveled the journey Gabriel is trying to begin. Because the future often leaves clues in the past. Imagine a young cricketer. You don't compare him with an average club player. You compare him with players who successfully transformed talent into legendary careers. Investing works exactly the same way. Instead of asking, is Gabriel India better than the average auto component company? A better question is Gabriel India slowly developing the characteristics of India's great engineering compounders? Notice the difference. We're comparing character, not valuation. We're comparing direction, not destination. Across India's automobile and engineering ecosystem, a handful of businesses have consistently created wealth over decades. Not because they discovered a magical formula, but because they repeatedly did a few things exceptionally well. They kept improving technology. They deepened customer relationships. They expanded globally. They allocated capital wisely. They generated healthy cash flows. And perhaps most importantly, they kept reinventing themselves without abandoning what made them successful. Look carefully at companies like Bosch India. They didn't become respected because they sold the cheapest products. They became respected because they solved increasingly complex engineering problems. Now think about Schaeffler India. Its reputation wasn't built overnight. It was built by combining technology, precision, and operational excellence over many years. Consider UNO Minda. It didn't remain confined to a single product. It steadily expanded into multiple automotive technologies, increasing its importance inside every vehicle. Or look at Endurance Technologies. Instead of chasing unrelated opportunities, it kept strengthening its engineering capabilities while deepening relationships with vehicle manufacturers. Then there are companies like Sundaram Fasteners. Many investors admire it not because it grows the fastest every year, but because of something much rarer: disciplined capital allocation, predictable execution, consistency. And finally, look at businesses like Samvardhana Motherson. Their journey demonstrates how partnerships, acquisitions, and global customer relationships can transform a domestic supplier into an international engineering company. Now, before someone misunderstands this comparison, I'm not saying Gabriel India will necessarily become any of these companies. Markets don't offer guarantees. They offer probabilities. The question isn't whether Gabriel will become another UNO Minda or Schaeffler. The question is whether it is beginning to develop the same DNA. Because long-term wealth creation rarely starts with extraordinary numbers. It starts with extraordinary habits. Let's test Gabriel India using a framework I like to call the compounder's checklist. The first question is simple. Is the business becoming more relevant? Not just bigger, more relevant. Notice management's strategy. Instead of remaining a suspension manufacturer, the company is gradually positioning itself as a broader mobility technology partner. That is an important shift. Customers increasingly prefer suppliers capable of solving multiple engineering challenges. Every successful expansion increases the company's importance within the automotive ecosystem. The second question: is management allocating capital intelligently? Factories alone don't create shareholder wealth. Returns on those factories do. So far, management has shown discipline by maintaining a healthy balance sheet while investing in future opportunities. But the real examination still lies ahead. Every partnership, every expansion, every acquisition, every new technology must eventually produce attractive returns on incremental capital. Otherwise, growth becomes activity, not value creation. Third question: is cash following accounting profits? One of the strongest signals in Gabriel India's favor is that improving earnings have been increasingly supported by improving operating cash flow. This matters enormously because businesses don't pay dividends with accounting entries. They pay them with cash. Factories aren't built with reported profits. They're built with cash. Acquisitions aren't funded by earnings per share. They're funded by cash. Cash flow is where business quality becomes difficult to fake. Fourth question: can management keep surprising the market positively? Remember, today's valuation already reflects optimism. That means simply meeting expectations may not always be enough. Future wealth creation now depends upon continuously delivering more than what investors already anticipate. This is where execution becomes the central character of our story. Not announcements, execution. Now let me introduce another mental model that every long-term investor should remember. It's called the flywheel effect. Imagine trying to rotate a giant iron wheel. The first push feels useless. The second push feels equally frustrating. Nothing appears to happen, but every push adds a little momentum. Eventually, the wheel starts rotating on its own. Great businesses behave similarly. Better products attract better customers. Better customers generate stronger cash flows. Stronger cash flows fund better technology. Better technology strengthens competitive advantage. Competitive advantage improves profitability. Higher profitability allows further investment. The cycle repeats. This self-reinforcing loop is called a flywheel. The most valuable companies in the world often operate powerful flywheels. The question every investor should ask is Gabriel India building one? The answer appears encouraging, but not yet complete. The ingredients are visible. The flywheel still needs time to prove itself. Now let's revisit valuation one last time. Throughout this documentary, we've repeatedly returned to one idea. A great company is not automatically a great investment. And Gabriel India beautifully illustrates this principle. On business quality, the company scores highly. On management credibility, it inspires confidence. On financial discipline, it remains strong. On industry opportunity, the runway appears attractive. But on valuation, the margin for disappointment becomes much smaller. This creates a fascinating investment paradox. Imagine buying the highest-ranked student in a classroom. You know the student is brilliant, but you also know everyone else already knows it. Future appreciation now depends upon the student becoming even better than everyone expects. That is exactly where Gabriel India stands today. This doesn't weaken the investment thesis. It changes the questions investors should ask. Instead of asking, "Is this a good company?" ask, "Can this company grow faster than the expectations already reflected in its valuation?" That single question separates investing from speculation. And this is precisely where technical behavior quietly enters the story once again. Many people believe charts predict the future. They don't. Charts reveal changing consensus. When improving fundamentals, credible management, healthy cash generation, expanding opportunities, and institutional participation begin moving in the same direction, market behavior often starts confirming that confidence. Think of it like several experienced doctors independently reaching the same diagnosis. One studies blood reports, another analyzes scans, a third reviews medical history. Each uses different information, yet they arrive at the same conclusion. Similarly, one analytical framework notices improving earnings, another notices strengthening cash flow, another detects improving business momentum, another identifies sustained institutional participation, another observes healthier price behavior. Different evidence, one emerging narrative. That is why this company repeatedly appears across different analytical approaches. Not because any one method is perfect, but because independent observations are increasingly pointing toward the same business. Finally, let's leave you with one thought. 5 years from now, people won't remember today's quarterly numbers. They won't remember today's valuation multiple. They won't remember today's market excitement. They will remember only one thing. Did Gabriel India become a better business than it is today? Because if the answer is yes, many of today's concerns will gradually fade. If the answer is no, even today's optimism may not protect investors. So perhaps the smartest way to follow this company isn't to watch its share price every day. Instead, watch the business. Watch whether every new factory earns attractive returns. Watch whether every partnership strengthens its competitive position. Watch whether cash flows keep supporting reported profits. Watch whether management continues converting ambition into execution. Watch whether the company keeps increasing its value inside every vehicle it touches. Because in the end, the market is like a patient teacher. It may reward excitement for a few months. It may reward stories for a few quarters. But over years, it rewards only one thing: businesses that continuously create more value than the world expected them to create. And perhaps that is the real story of Gabriel India. Not whether it is already a great company, but whether it is quietly taking the first irreversible steps toward becoming one of India's next great engineering compounders. The answer won't be found by watching the stock every day. It will be found by watching the business patiently. Because in investing, wealth is rarely created by predicting the future with certainty. It is created by recognizing exceptional businesses while they are still writing their future. The investment decision: should you buy the story or wait for the story to become even better? We've traveled a long journey together. We started by understanding how India's manufacturing ecosystem is quietly changing. We saw why companies working behind the scenes often benefit more than people realize. We understood Gabriel India's business model. We analyzed management. We examined valuation through multiple lenses. We explored why the market has become increasingly interested in this company. And finally, we compared it with some of India's finest engineering businesses. Now comes the question every investor ultimately wants answered. So, what should I do? Interestingly, the market never rewards a single answer. It rewards asking the right questions. Because investing isn't about predicting tomorrow's stock price. It's about increasing the probability of making good decisions. Imagine you're buying a house. Would you decide simply because it's beautiful? Probably not. Would you decide only because it's cheap? Again, probably not. You would ask 3 questions. Is it a good house? Am I paying a reasonable price? Will this locality become more valuable over the next decade? A sensible property buyer never ignores any one of these questions. The same framework applies to stocks. And this brings us to what I call the 3-layer investment filter. Not because it's complicated, but because it forces us to think like long-term investors instead of short-term traders. The first layer: business quality. This is the easiest question. Is Gabriel India becoming a stronger business? Looking at everything we've discussed, the answer appears to be yes. Revenue has improved. Profitability has strengthened. Cash generation has become healthier. The balance sheet remains comfortable. Management is thinking beyond today's products. Instead of protecting yesterday's business, they are investing for tomorrow's opportunities. Few companies successfully reinvent themselves while maintaining financial discipline. Gabriel appears to be attempting exactly that. This is why business quality is no longer the biggest debate. The market has largely accepted that this is a quality engineering company. But remember, good businesses don't automatically become great investments. That's where the second layer begins. The second layer: valuation. This is where investing becomes uncomfortable. Because valuation forces us to separate emotion from mathematics. Imagine 2 identical mango orchards. Both produce exactly the same number of mangoes. One is available for 1 crore, the other for 3 crores. Which one offers better future returns? Most people instinctively choose the cheaper orchard. Now imagine something changes. The expensive orchard is surrounded by newly developing cities. Roads are expanding. Cold storage facilities are coming. Exports are increasing. Production is expected to double over the next decade. Suddenly, the expensive orchard isn't necessarily expensive anymore. You're paying for future productivity, not present income. This is exactly where Gabriel India stands today. The market isn't valuing yesterday's Gabriel. It's valuing the Gabriel management hopes to build over the next decade. That is both exciting and demanding. Because premium valuation behaves like an advance salary. The company has already received market appreciation before delivering all future results. Now it must continue earning that confidence every single year. This is why I believe investors should stop asking, is the stock expensive? Instead ask, how much future success has already been priced into today's valuation? That question changes everything. Because valuation isn't a prediction. It's an expectation meter. The higher the expectation, the higher the responsibility placed on management. The third layer: market confirmation. Now comes something fascinating. If valuation already looks demanding, why hasn't market interest disappeared? Because markets are forward-looking. Imagine standing outside a theater. You notice hundreds of people entering. The movie hasn't started yet, but the crowd is telling you something. Expectations are high. Technical behavior works similarly. It doesn't guarantee success, but it reveals where collective conviction is building. This is why experienced investors never treat technical analysis as fortune-telling. They treat it as market voting. Fundamentals tell us what the business deserves. Technical behavior tells us what participants currently believe. Neither should be analyzed in isolation. Think of a courtroom. Fundamentals provide evidence. Technical behavior reflects the jury's opinion. A conviction becomes stronger when both point toward the same conclusion. Today, Gabriel India's improving business quality and improving market acceptance appear to be moving in the same direction. That doesn't eliminate risk, but it increases confidence that the business story isn't being noticed by only one analytical framework. Different approaches, looking at different data, are increasingly recognizing the same company. That convergence matters. The institutional checklist. Let's now think exactly the way a fund manager might think. Instead of asking, can this stock double? They ask, can this business continue surprising positively for the next 5 years? That depends upon several conditions. The first, management must continue executing better than competitors. The second, new technologies must begin contributing meaningful profits rather than remaining promising announcements. The third, returns on new investments should remain high. The fourth, cash flow should continue supporting reported earnings. The fifth, customer relationships should deepen as the company supplies more value inside every vehicle. If these conditions continue improving, the business could gradually justify today's premium valuation. But now let's reverse the thinking. What would make institutional investors uncomfortable? Not one weak quarter, not temporary industry slowdown. Instead, they would closely monitor structural changes. Suppose revenue continues growing, but cash flow stops improving. Suppose capital expenditure rises sharply, yet returns on that investment begin falling. Suppose margins remain under pressure despite higher sales. Suppose working capital keeps consuming more cash every year. Suppose management's ambitious expansion fails to create proportional profitability. None of these developments would necessarily make Gabriel India a bad company, but they could weaken the very reasons investors were willing to pay a premium. And when premium expectations weaken, valuation often adjusts much faster than the underlying business. This is one of the hardest lessons in investing. A company doesn't need to become bad for a stock to disappoint. It simply needs to become less extraordinary than expected. The circle of competence. There's another lesson hidden inside this story. Warren Buffett often speaks about staying inside your circle of competence. Many investors misunderstand this idea. It doesn't mean investing only in industries you already know. It means investing only in businesses you can continuously understand and monitor. Ask yourself honestly, can you track automobile production trends? Can you understand component suppliers? Can you monitor management execution? Can you follow capital allocation? Can you judge whether new technologies are succeeding? If the answer is yes, then Gabriel India may remain inside your circle of competence. If not, the smarter decision isn't necessarily to avoid the company. It's to spend more time understanding it before investing. Knowledge reduces uncertainty far more effectively than predictions. The real scorecard. So where does Gabriel India stand today? If I had to summarize the entire documentary in one sentence, it would be this. Gabriel India is no longer trying to become a bigger suspension manufacturer. It is trying to become a broader mobility technology company. And markets are already beginning to value it accordingly. Whether that valuation ultimately proves justified depends entirely on one word: execution. Not optimism. Not narratives. Not headlines. Execution. Because every great engineering company we admire today earned its reputation the same way. Year after year. Factory after factory. Product after product. Customer after customer. Quarter after quarter. They didn't become compounders because investors believed in them. Investors believed in them because they repeatedly proved they deserved that belief. Perhaps Gabriel India is standing at a similar crossroads. The destination isn't guaranteed, but the direction is becoming increasingly interesting. And maybe that's the most valuable takeaway from this entire discussion. Don't watch this company to predict tomorrow's stock price. Watch it to answer a much more important question. Is management consistently creating more value than the market expected? Because if the answer remains yes for many years, the stock price will eventually follow. And if the answer slowly becomes no, the chart will usually tell that story much later than the business itself. That is why the smartest investors don't chase prices. They chase improving businesses. They don't buy stories. They buy execution. And they don't measure success by whether a stock rises next month. They measure success by whether the business they own becomes stronger with every passing year. So the next time you hear someone ask, "Should I buy Gabriel India?" perhaps respond with a different question. Do you believe the next 5 years of Gabriel India will be even better than what today's valuation already assumes? Because that single question is where intelligent investing truly begins. And perhaps it never really ends. The mental models that separate investors from speculators. Before we end this journey, I want to leave you with something far more valuable than an opinion on Gabriel India. Because opinions change, markets change, valuations change, even businesses change. But the way you think, that becomes your biggest competitive advantage. Imagine two people looking at exactly the same company. Both read the annual report. Both study the financial statements. Both see the same chart. Yet one compounds wealth for decades, while the other keeps jumping from one stock to another. What creates that difference? Usually, it's not information. It's interpretation. Great investors don't simply collect facts. They connect them. And that's where mental models become powerful. They're like different lenses. Each lens reveals something that another lens cannot. Let's put Gabriel India through a few of these lenses. Not to predict the future, but to learn how professional investors think. Mental Model 1, the iceberg. Imagine standing on a beach. A giant iceberg floats in front of you. Only a small portion is visible above the water. Most people judge its size by what they can see. But nearly 90% remains hidden beneath the surface. Businesses are remarkably similar. The stock price, quarterly earnings, news headlines. These are only the visible part. The hidden part is much larger. Management quality, customer relationships, engineering capability, research and development, supplier trust, execution culture, capital allocation. These invisible assets rarely appear on the balance sheet. Yet they determine whether the visible numbers keep improving year after year. This is exactly why experienced investors spend more time understanding the business than predicting tomorrow's share price. Because prices move with emotions. Business quality compounds with time. Mental Model 2, the flywheel. Earlier we discussed the flywheel. Let's complete the picture. Imagine pushing a giant iron wheel. Initially, nothing happens. It feels frustrating. Every push appears wasted. But every push stores a little energy. Eventually, the wheel begins moving almost effortlessly. Now think about Gabriel India. Better engineering attracts stronger customers. Stronger customers provide larger orders. Larger orders improve economies of scale. Higher scale generates stronger cash flows. Stronger cash flows finance technology. Technology creates better products. Better products deepen customer trust. Customer trust generates more business. The wheel keeps spinning. This is why investors don't simply ask, "Did revenue grow?" They ask, "Is the flywheel becoming stronger?" Because once a healthy flywheel gains momentum, growth often becomes self-reinforcing. Mental Model 3, the compounding machine. Albert Einstein supposedly called compounding the eighth wonder of the world. Whether he actually said it or not, the idea remains extraordinary. Imagine planting one mango tree. After several years, it starts producing fruit. Instead of eating all the fruit, you plant more trees. Those trees produce more fruit. Then more trees. Eventually, the orchard expands almost on its own. Businesses compound similarly. High return on capital. Healthy cash flow. Disciplined reinvestment. Repeat. This is why ROAS matters so much. It's not just a ratio. It's the engine that powers compounding. Companies earning high returns while continuously finding opportunities to reinvest often create extraordinary shareholder wealth. The key word is reinvest. Without reinvestment, compounding slows. Mental model 4, optionality. Imagine buying a smartphone. Initially, you purchase it only for calling. A few years later, it becomes your camera, your wallet, your television, your GPS, your office. The phone became more valuable because new possibilities kept appearing. Investors call this optionality. Great companies often create opportunities that didn't exist when investors first bought them. Now think about Gabriel India. Years ago, many investors saw only a suspension company. Today, management is steadily building capabilities across broader automotive technologies, thermal management, advanced engineering, mobility solutions, strategic partnerships. Each new capability is like adding another application to the smartphone. Not every option succeeds, but every successful option expands the company's future. This is why optionality deserves attention. Markets often reward future possibilities long before they become large contributors to profits. Mental Model 5, Circle of Competence. Suppose I asked you to invest in a biotechnology company. Would you feel confident? Maybe. Maybe not. Now imagine someone who spent 20 years working in pharmaceuticals. The same company suddenly looks easier to understand. Nothing changed about the business. Knowledge changed. This is Warren Buffett's famous circle of competence. The smartest investors aren't experts in everything. They're experts in knowing what they don't understand. If you're comfortable following automobile demand, component suppliers, engineering businesses, capital allocation, then Gabriel India may fall inside your circle. If not, don't reject the opportunity. Expand your understanding first. Knowledge widens the circle. Mental Model 6, Second-order thinking. Most investors stop after the first question. Automobile demand is increasing. Therefore, automobile companies will benefit. That's first-order thinking. Second-order thinking asks, who supplies those automobile companies? Who provides the technology? Who earns higher margins? Who benefits regardless of which manufacturer wins? Notice how our entire documentary quietly followed this principle. Instead of focusing on one vehicle manufacturer, we focused on an engineering company supplying multiple manufacturers. Sometimes, the biggest opportunities exist one step behind the spotlight. Mental Model 7, the Red Queen effect. There's a famous idea from biology. The Red Queen tells Elise, you have to keep running just to stay in the same place. Businesses face the same challenge. Standing still isn't stability. It's decline. Competitors improve. Technology evolves. Customer expectations change. Costs increase. The companies that survive are the ones that continuously adapt. Look carefully at Gabriel India's recent strategy. It isn't simply protecting yesterday's business. It is investing in tomorrow's relevance. Whether those investments succeed remains to be seen. But refusing to evolve would almost certainly have been the greater risk. Mental Model 8, Signals versus Noise. Every day, markets produce thousands of headlines. Broker upgrades, broker downgrades, rumors, television debates, social media excitement. Most of this is noise. Signals are different. Signals persist. Revenue improving over several years. That's a signal. Cash flow strengthening consistently. That's a signal. Return on capital remaining healthy. That's a signal. Management investing carefully. That's a signal. Multiple independent analytical approaches repeatedly identifying the same business. That's another signal. Professional investors spend far more time separating signals from noise than predicting tomorrow's opening price. Mental Model 9, the institutional triangle. And finally, let me leave you with one framework that brings everything together. Whenever a professional investor studies a business, three questions silently run in the background. The first, is the business becoming stronger? Not just larger, stronger, higher quality earnings, better cash flow, healthier returns on capital, smarter management decisions. The second, is the market beginning to recognize that improvement? This is where price behavior becomes meaningful. Not because charts predict the future, but because they reveal whether informed participants are gradually reaching similar conclusions. When independent analytical methods repeatedly begin noticing the same company, it often suggests that the underlying business deserves closer attention. The third, has the future already been fully priced in? This is where valuation becomes the final filter. A company can satisfy the first two questions beautifully, yet still deliver average investment returns if expectations have become excessively optimistic. Conversely, a good business with improving fundamentals, reasonable valuation, and increasing market recognition often creates a far more favorable balance between opportunity and risk. The most powerful investments usually emerge when all three corners of this triangle remain aligned. Business quality, market confirmation, reasonable expectations. If one corner weakens, the investment thesis deserves to be re-examined. The final reflection. So, after everything we've discussed, what is Gabriel India really? Is it a suspension company? Yes, but that's no longer the complete story. Is it an engineering company? Certainly, but perhaps it's becoming something more. Is it an expensive stock? By several traditional valuation measures, it commands a premium. But premium businesses often do. The more meaningful question is whether future execution will continue to justify that premium. That's the real investment debate. Because over the next 5 or 10 years, the market won't reward Gabriel India simply for being a good company. It will reward or punish the company based on one thing alone. Can management convert today's ambitions into tomorrow's cash flows, returns on capital, and sustainable competitive advantages? If they can, today's valuation may eventually look like the market recognized a long-term compounder early. If they cannot, today's premium may simply prove that expectations ran ahead of execution. And perhaps that is the most important lesson from this entire journey. Don't fall in love with a stock. Don't fear a valuation. Don't worship a chart. And don't blindly trust a story. Instead, follow the evidence. Watch the business. Watch management. Watch capital allocation. Watch cash flows. Watch whether every year the company becomes more valuable to its customers than it was the year before. Because in the end, great investing isn't about finding certainty. It's about repeatedly choosing businesses where the probability of long-term value creation continues to improve. And that is the lens through which every great company should be viewed, not just Gabriel India, but every business you will ever study. The investor's framework. A story doesn't end with buying. It begins there. Before we close this documentary, I'd like to ask you one last question. Imagine it's 5 years from today. Gabriel India has either become one of India's most respected engineering companies, or it has become just another good business that never lived up to the expectations built around it. What will decide which path becomes reality? Will it be the stock market? No. Will it be analysts? No. Will it be social media? Definitely not. The answer is surprisingly simple. The business itself. Because over long periods, the market doesn't create business performance. Business performance creates market performance. This brings us to perhaps the most important lesson every investor should remember. There is a huge difference between buying a stock and owning a business. Most people buy stocks. Very few actually own businesses. What's the difference? Imagine you buy a small restaurant. Would you wake up every morning asking, what does someone else think my restaurant is worth today? Of course not. You would ask, are more customers coming? Is food quality improving? Are profits growing? Is my chef becoming better? Are repeat customers increasing? You would focus on business performance. Ironically, the moment we buy listed companies, we stop thinking like business owners. Instead, we start behaving like spectators watching a scoreboard. The scoreboard is important, but it is never more important than the game being played. That is exactly why long-term wealth is often created by investors who understand businesses, not merely prices. The 4 conversations every investor should have. Whenever you study any company, don't immediately ask whether you should buy it. Instead, have 4 conversations with yourself. The first conversation: why does this company deserve to exist? Not every business creates real value. Some simply participate in an industry. Others become indispensable. Gabriel India appears to be moving toward becoming increasingly important within the automotive value chain. Not because it sells a commodity, but because it solves engineering problems. And businesses solving increasingly difficult problems generally remain relevant longer than businesses competing only on price. The second conversation: what can destroy this story? This is where most investors become uncomfortable. They spend hours searching for reasons to buy, very little time searching for reasons to sell. Let's imagine a few possibilities. Suppose electric mobility evolves much faster than expected, and the company fails to adapt. Suppose new investments don't generate acceptable returns. Suppose global technology partners don't produce the expected business benefits. Suppose customer concentration increases. Suppose another supplier develops superior technology. Suppose margins gradually decline because pricing power weakens. None of these events need to happen. But intelligent investors think about them before they invest. Charlie Munger often said, invert, always invert. Instead of asking, how do I make money? Ask, how could I lose money? Avoiding large mistakes often creates better long-term returns than constantly searching for extraordinary opportunities. The third conversation: what evidence would prove I was wrong? This may be the hardest question of all. Most investors don't change their opinion when facts change. They defend their original opinion. Professional investors do the opposite. They actively search for evidence that contradicts their own thesis. Imagine a doctor. He doesn't order tests hoping his diagnosis is correct. He orders tests hoping to discover whether he's wrong. Investing requires the same intellectual honesty. For Gabriel India, future evidence matters more than today's optimism. Will new businesses scale successfully? Will return on incremental capital remain healthy? Will operating cash flow continue strengthening? Will margins improve as management expects? Will the company increase its engineering content per vehicle? If these answers gradually become weaker, the investment thesis deserves to be reconsidered. Not because the company suddenly became bad, but because the original assumptions changed. The fourth conversation: compared to what? This is perhaps the question that separates portfolio managers from stock pickers. Every investment competes against another investment. Capital is limited. Every rupee invested in Gabriel India is a rupee not invested elsewhere. So the comparison should never be, is Gabriel India good? The comparison should be, is Gabriel India becoming better faster than other high-quality engineering companies available at similar or better valuations? That changes everything. Suppose another engineering business offers similar management quality, similar growth, similar cash flow, but significantly more reasonable expectations. That business may provide a larger margin of safety. Institutional investors continuously compare opportunities this way. Not because one company is bad, but because capital always seeks the best risk-adjusted opportunity. The investment dashboard you should build. If I were tracking Gabriel India over the next 5 years, I wouldn't obsess over the daily share price. Instead, I'd build a dashboard with a handful of questions. Not numbers. Questions. Has management delivered what it promised? Are new businesses contributing meaningful revenue? Is return on capital remaining strong despite expansion? Is every new investment creating higher future earnings? Are operating cash flows growing along with accounting profits? Is working capital becoming more efficient rather than consuming additional cash? Is the company increasing its importance inside every vehicle? Has the competitive position strengthened? Has management's capital allocation remained disciplined? And finally, if this company were not listed today, would I still want to become a partner in this business? That final question removes market noise. It forces you to think like an owner. The beautiful paradox of investing. There is one paradox that every successful investor eventually discovers. The best businesses often look expensive. The cheapest businesses often remain cheap for a reason. Extraordinary returns rarely come from buying low-quality companies at low prices. They usually come from buying improving businesses before the market fully appreciates the duration of their improvement. Notice that word, duration. Most investors focus on growth. Professional investors focus on how long growth can continue. Because if a company grows at healthy rates for 2 years, that's a good business. If it continues doing so for 10 or 15 years, that's how compounders are created. And this is the unanswered question surrounding Gabriel India. Not whether it can grow next year, but whether it can continue evolving for the next decade. The final mental model, the river. Let me leave you with one final image. Imagine standing beside a river. Every second, the water changes, the current changes, the surface changes. Yet the river remains the same river. Businesses behave similarly. Every quarter changes. Every annual report changes. Every product changes. Every valuation changes. Even management teams eventually change. But what truly matters is whether the river continues flowing in the right direction. When studying Gabriel India, don't become distracted by every ripple. Watch the direction of the river. Is the business becoming more technologically capable? Is it becoming more relevant to customers? Is management allocating capital more intelligently? Is cash generation becoming stronger? Is the company steadily climbing the engineering value chain? If the answer to those questions continues to be yes, temporary market fluctuations become far less important. Because eventually, the market catches up with business reality. It may take months, sometimes years, but over long periods, business quality almost always has the final word, the closing thought. So, after everything we've explored together, perhaps the biggest takeaway isn't whether Gabriel India is a buy or a wait. The bigger lesson is this. Never confuse a rising stock with a great business. Never confuse a great business with a great investment. And never confuse a premium valuation with overvaluation or a low valuation with opportunity. Every investment lives at the intersection of business quality, management execution, valuation, and market recognition. Remove any one of these pillars, and the investment story becomes incomplete. Gabriel India is an excellent case study because it forces us to think beyond simple answers. It reminds us that investing isn't about finding certainty. It's about continuously updating probabilities as new evidence emerges. So, the next time you study any company, not just Gabriel India, don't ask, how much can this stock go up? Instead ask, if I own this entire business for the next 10 years, would I feel proud of the way management is creating value? Because that single question transforms a trader into an investor. And in the long run, that transformation is often far more valuable than any single stock you will ever own. If this documentary changed the way you think about businesses, not just the way you think about Gabriel India, then it has achieved its real purpose. Because successful investing begins with understanding companies, but exceptional investing begins with understanding how to think. Top of form, bottom of form. The last question every investor must answer. We've reached the end of this journey. But in reality, This is exactly where your journey as an investor begins. Most people don't lose money because they buy bad businesses. They lose money because they stop asking questions once they buy a good one. They become emotionally attached. They stop observing. They stop challenging their own assumptions. And the market has a very effective way of reminding us that confidence without continuous learning eventually becomes expensive. So before we close this story, let's return to the very first question we asked. Has the market already recognized Gabriel India's greatness? Or is the real story still unfolding? After everything we've explored, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's somewhere in between. The market has undoubtedly recognized that Gabriel India is no longer the company it was a few years ago. It sees improving business quality. It sees disciplined management. It sees healthy cash flows. It sees stronger capital efficiency. It sees an expanding technology portfolio. It sees a company trying to move higher up the automotive value chain. That's why the valuation today reflects confidence rather than doubt. But markets don't stop rewarding companies because they become expensive. They stop rewarding companies when execution grows slower than expectations. And that is an important distinction. Because expectations are now high. Every new factory must produce attractive returns. Every new partnership must eventually create meaningful business. Every rupee invested must earn more than the previous rupee. Every strategic decision must strengthen competitive advantage rather than simply increase size. The company has entered a different phase of its life. Earlier, investors asked, can Gabriel India become a quality business? Today, the question has changed to, can Gabriel India continue behaving like a premium engineering company for the next decade? That is a much harder challenge. Now imagine two mountaineers. The first is climbing from the base of the mountain. Every step creates excitement. Every achievement feels extraordinary. The second has almost reached the summit. Now, every additional step requires greater effort, greater preparation, greater precision. Businesses evolve in exactly the same way. Early growth is often easier. Sustained excellence is much harder. That is why long-term compounders are so rare. Not because they cannot grow, but because they must continue earning the market's confidence year after year through changing economic cycles, technological shifts, new competitors, and evolving customer expectations. This is where Gabriel India stands today. Not at the beginning of its journey, but perhaps at the beginning of a much more demanding chapter. The chapter where expectations become the biggest competitor. Now let's think like an institutional investor one final time. Suppose you had to make a decision today. Would you reject the company because the valuation isn't cheap? That would ignore business quality.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.